Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Kvetching with Adam and Jared. We have a very special episode for you tonight. We are advancing our technology to a whole new level. We've been gathering the absolute worst social media posts that we have seen since October 7th, coming from academics and activists for the most part, and the odd politician here and there. So these are all people who should really know better than to hurl charges such as genocide and whatever else at Israel, because they should be investigating these things empirically. So we are going to peruse the internet, if you will, and go over some of these posts just to see how malicious and pernicious and factually unfound the attack coming toward Israel from the academy and from outside the academy, from within Jewish studies and from without Jewish studies, is currently transpiring. And I believe it's getting worse every single week.
And we're providing a very valuable service here.
Yeah.
We are reading these very annoying accounts from social media influencers, so you don't have to.
Yeah, and a few caveats and disclaimers here. Does caveat and disclaimer mean the same thing? Was that redundant?
They're slightly different.
Okay, well, then I'm issuing both. These are all public posts, right? We didn't go and have someone snitch on somebody for us. These people have all broadcasted their idiocy to the entire world. And we are not going to attack, no ad hominem attacks here. We are critiquing their words. We will certainly label them idiots and morons and whatnot based on what has come out of their mouths. And we are non-discriminatory in any way. We have not taken gender, race, or religion into account in choosing the people we have targeted. Though, of course, their status in the academy has played a role to a certain extent, because we're not just going to take some random idiots whose words mean absolutely nothing. We could devote hours and hours of our time to that. But these are all people who are perhaps familiar to you or perhaps not familiar to you, but if you swing in academic circles, the names will be familiar. And some of what they have to say is truly disturbing. Any opening remarks, Adam?
No, let's have some fun here.
All right, so I'm going to turn on screen sharing. Let me choose the right monitor, and here we go. Ooh, look who we have here.
We've got Jeremy Corbyn. Is it Corbyn or is it Corbyn? I've heard it pronounced both ways.
I mean, if we're Corbyn, wouldn't there be an E at the end of it?
I don't know, but I've heard it pronounced Corbyn.
I don't know. I'm trained in Russian, so I always see Corbyn. I always make the E sound in Russian when I see names with a Y in it. So I don't know. I don't know how the British pronounce it. So, but I've heard it said as Corbyn. Anyway, let's delve into his words instead of making fun of his name. We should get people's names correct. All right. I will read. Gaza is full of creativity, learning, and joy. That is what is being destroyed. We need an urgent ceasefire, the release of hostages, and an end to the siege. And then maybe we can try to bring some hope to the people of Gaza. Teachers, artists, musicians, longing for peace. Now, on the face of it, there's nothing wrong with a statement like that if we existed in a vacuum, right?
Yeah, but it's a very rose-colored image of what Gaza is like. And I wonder if he has ever actually visited there himself. I don't know. But I mean, you know, to think that in a place that is ruled by a paramilitary organization like Hamas, which has a very violent one-track mind, and to think of that such a place as being, you know, this paradise with all this lovely art and music and culture and learning going on everywhere around you is very odd.
Yeah, I guarantee. I'm sure people do play musical instruments in Gaza.
Yeah.
But every other tweet, I mean, it's a little bit contradictory here, because every other tweet coming from the left says, you know, it's become an open air prison and it's ruled by these horrible people who have nothing to do with the Gazans themselves. So, you know, it's a little bit, and, you know, just to cite, you know, the Zionist myth. And again, you know, we are historians, we are scholars here. We realize much of the story of Zionism is mythical, collective memory. You know, I think of all the cliches, like they made the desert bloom, which, you know, did happen to a certain extent. But when they focus on things like that, they, you know, cover up the ins and outs and nuances of the day. So this is a rather absurd.
At first, they say that Gaza is absolute squalor.
Yeah.
And then they say that it's, you know, this place of great paradise with all these wonderful things going on there, and that the Israelis are coming in and disrupting it.
At the same time, the Warsaw Ghetto was filled with teachers, artists, and musicians. So, of course, they were leading prosperous lives before they were, pushed into the Warsaw Ghetto from all corners of Poland. So that's not really the story of how.
Nobody is doubting that there is some of this going on in Gaza. Yeah. I'm sure that there is quite a bit of it. But all the more reason that we need Hamas out of there.
Yeah.
Right. For the Palestinian people that want to extend and expand their educational sector, their arts sector. Hamas rule cannot possibly be good for the preservation of what Corbyn wants.
Nope, especially if they take their Islamic fundamentalist charter seriously. And they have been likened to ISIS and other groups, so I imagine they're not as extreme as those.
Also, even without that, how much they're squandering the money that's given to them that could be spent on this art, on museums, on musical performances, on education. They're squandering it on who knows what. I mean, obviously their own paramilitary needs, but I'm sure there's so much corruption. It's lining the pockets of Hamas leaders. Let's get Hamas out of there and use the money wisely.
So where is the Gaza Symphony Orchestra? I'm sure Israel and Egypt would allow them out to go tour the world and play their music.
Hamas is a very big sponsor of the arts worldwide, as we all know. If you're looking for funding for the arts, for your theatrical production, for your sculptures, your paintings, I would recommend writing to the Hamas Foundation, writing a grant proposal, and they'll be happy to fund your work.
Well, given the new woke or it's not really new, but given the direction of the woke jihad alliance in academia, I suspect Hamas would start funding NEH grants and whatnot for the humanities. Why wouldn't they? They're educating people who think like they do.
Mm-hmm. So, all right, Jeremy. Not the National Endowment for the Humanities, it would be the National Endowment for the Inhumanities.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think they would actually call themselves that, but they would be that in spirit, if not in name. All right, who do we have next? A professor from the University of Winnipeg, which is from my native Canada, not a place you really want to live. It's freezing and flat. His name, I hope I pronounced it correctly, is Anyaduba Arthur Chigbo. And he is a faculty member of English. I don't know if he is a professor or a lecturer or what. I didn't look it up. And associate in Canada doesn't necessarily mean tenure. They have a slightly different system. All right, I just wanted to make sure his name was out there because I'd never heard of him before I saw the tweets. Let's see what he had to say. American and European governments sending troops and weapons to support mass atrocity. And you'd think the Israeli military doesn't already have enough weapons to slaughter people they've starved and ghettoized for decades now. Let's read the full thing. Let's read the full thing. Oh, by the way, mass starvation is yet again deployed as a weapon of this total just war. Mass starvation, that weapon of genocide they prefer to euphemize as economic sanction, blockade, etc.
Let me ask you a question. I keep hearing about this starvation. Is there more?
No, those are them. I just went back to the first one.
Okay, yeah. We keep hearing this accusation against Israel that they are starving the Palestinian people. How are the Hamas eating then?
It's a good question. Where
they have food, right?
Yeah. Maybe here's where we get the confusion between Hamas and hummus that we hear sometimes.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah,
there could be a relationship.
We know that they've stockpiled food in their tunnels. And they've been planning this well in advance. So they may even have a refrigerated system down there, and they've got plenty of food for themselves.
I've seen pictures of their palaces. No, they're living well. They're living so presumably they're also eating. So
they're eating, and they're also on drugs, right? There's this drug Captagon, I think it's called, that the Hamas. I don't mean the civilians, but the Hamas soldiers have been given that will trigger the rage part of their brains, so that they will commit even greater brutal atrocities. So there's food and there's drugs. I mean, there's all kinds of supplies that Hamas has. It's hard to necessarily feel sorry for the situation. I mean, I do feel sorry for the situation. It's just that to pin the blame on Israel for that is foolhardy. It's astounding.
Yeah, well, I'll note one thing in his favor. He did leave Canada. He did let Canada off the hook. He only refers to American and European governments.
Uh-huh.
But I'd like to point something out here where he talks about the euphemizes economic sanction and blockade. Note that he used the word blockade and not siege. So he's not talking about the current moment where, yeah, indeed, Israel is preventing almost everything from getting into Gaza, but that was certainly not true before October 7th. Yeah, there was an economic blockade or a blockade of sorts, but they let in food constantly. They were just keeping out things like fuel or anything that could be used in the making of rockets, right? But they weren't keeping.
They've got plenty of fuel down there.
Hmm?
The Hamas have plenty of fuel.
Yeah, and where are they getting it from? How do they get all that fuel?
They stockpiled it.
Okay, well, it appears this whole tweet is just, one big lie. And I really, it's the mass starvation part that caught my eye because, of course, mass starvation has been a tactic of genocide for much of history. There's been a lot of good work done on mass starvation and the Holocaust, which occurred, almost simultaneously with Stalin's campaigns of mass starvation in the Soviet Union. So he's essentially likening Israel's policies in Gaza to Hitler pre-final solution policies and Stalinism, which of course is utterly absurd. Okay.
Well, it is illegal under international law to use starvation as a tactic of war.
Yeah.
Like I said in an earlier episode of this show, that this is not being done as a tactic of war. It is a consequence of war, right? In order to prevent Hamas from bringing in reinforcement weapons and fuel and things that they need to continue their reign of terror, the Israelis have very little choice but to control what is coming in and out of Gaza's border. So if that means that people are starving, that's horrible. It's sad. It's terrible. But who's to blame for that? Hamas. So
Hamas, 100% across the board.
100% Hamas.
Yeah. All right. Well, goodbye, Professor Chigbo. We are moving on. Mira Sukharov, here's a familiar name in Jewish studies. And, the first part of this tweet, this tweet 10/7. Okay, she literally tweeted this, within hours. She tweeted this while beheadings were still going on. And I think the date for some of these is important because it preceded any sort of Israeli retaliatory actions whatsoever. Israel was literally trying to save grandmothers and babies.
And you can see the timestamp, 1:12 p.m.
Yeah.
October 7th, 2023.
Yeah, it was a Saturday. I know. I was at the Ashboro Zoo with my son. I'm trying to follow what was going on. So it will help, folks, if you keep your explanations separate from your justifications. Okay, it's an innocuous statement, though really when your people are being mass slaughtered, spare us the lecturing. Of course, there's a pretty simple explanation for what Hamas did. I'm not even sure what she means by that. A simple explanation. What's a simple explanation? That they're Islamic terrorists?
Well, they play these semantic games all the time. Right, that there's a difference between an explanation and a justification. Well, okay, semantically there is a difference, but when you're justifying something, you're justifying it. You should be using some kind of reason, some sort of rational basis. So what she's basically saying is to ignore all reason, which means put the explanations aside, and justify it in some other with some other criteria. Well, what is that other criteria?
Gaza's under a blockade, but of course, she's likened Gaza to Auschwitz before, so so it's because of the empirical daily suffering of the Palestinians. That is the reason she is trying to suggest that Hamas did it. Nothing to do with their Islamic genocidal intent, made abundantly clear by their statement.
I wonder, do these people look back any longer in history than 6 months?
Well, she's a political scientist, so anything I say might, impact the entire discipline.
I'm a political scientist also, right? And I'm aware that you can't understand politics without looking at historical context, right? At least to some degree. Maybe historians, I think, in many cases, make too big of a deal out of it. Yeah. I'm kind of poking fun at your discipline. But historical context, we both agree, matter. Clearly, you know, when Gaza was first given back to the Palestinians, Israel had a peace deal with the government there at the time. The government at the time decided to, there was a new government. They held an election and Hamas won, and they nullified the agreement. And by the way, let me also say, you know, speaking as a political scientist, what we know that democracy means a peaceful transition of power, right?
Yeah.
Is that correct? So you have an election, which is a peaceful transition of power. Why do you need to kill, as the winning party, why do you need to come in and kill all of the current members of the outgoing government for you to come in? Why do you need to?
Didn't the PLO launch, didn't the PLO not accept Hamas's victory? Wasn't that part of the reason that the Civil War started?
Yeah, there was that problem, right?
There's no innocence in that Hamas PLO war. That was a typical, we're contesting the election result and we're going to use violence to do so. Except the people who won the election were the Islamic fundamentalists, not the ostensible pro-peace party, right?
Yeah, but why do you need to kill them? I mean, can't you sort of get them out and you know, put them in prison or something like it? So there obviously there was a serious problem with the transition of power that took place there, which means like this is such an unstable place to begin with. But anyway, so Hamas decided to nullify the agreement that Israel had with Fatah, and then so Israel had to put up a blockade.
Was this before or after Sharon dismantled the settlements?
This was after.
Okay, so really, Israel is not occupying Gaza or settling Gaza in any way whatsoever.
This was 2 years after disengagement.
Okay, so that was 2003, 4, right?
No, right. 2007.
Oh, was that late?
Yeah, because disengagement was 2005.
Okay, all right. Those years of grad school are a bit of a blur. Okay, but there's no justification for targeted attacks on civilians. Okay, great. However, you know, all these people have to have a however afterwards. Nor is there justification for ethnic cleansing in 48. So just as if it's an afterthought, she put it in parentheses. She decided to say something about the Nakba. Presumably, she's talking about ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, not the Jews who were ethnically cleansed out of East Jerusalem, nor the ensuing ethnic cleansing of Jews out of Arab states that would take place over the next 10 to 15 years. I don't see the relevance for it in this tweet. So if you're going to mention that, then draw some sort of causal link, or mention every other act of ethnic cleansing that was taking place throughout the former theaters of war between 45 and 48. There was rampant ethnic cleansing going on in Eastern Europe, Germans being mass resettled out of Poland, and the entire Soviet sphere, people were being collectively resettled. You have India, Pakistan at this very moment, you know, trying to work with the partition that turned out violent, though in the end, 2 states did accept the partition. It took a while, unlike in this case. So this seems entirely gratuitous, and it seems, well, it's not gratuitous because it's our, you know, it's her however moment. You know, it's like, let's not forget who the true victims are moment. Yeah, so not very helpful. At the very moment when Jews are actually still getting slaughtered. I mean, there were probably, some of the victims were probably still alive at this point. Nobody knew what was going on at this point, except for the invasion.
And by the way, can you go back to that? Who is she talking to? Who's the folks? Who are the folks?
Her audience. She has written a memoir, so presumably she has an audience.
So she's telling her audience,
her folks. You know, Obama always used the word folks when he spoke.
Yeah, but
she's being folksy.
But why would they need to keep their explanations separate from their justifications?
Because she's a professor and she thinks she knows better.
I don't understand. Like, so is she saying that people that are critical of Hamas need to separate these two things, or is who's she talking about?
I don't understand most of the tweet. The only reason I highlighted it is because of the mentioning of the Nakba, because she had to do one of those however things in there. I think the first part is actually gibberish because I'm really not sure what she's saying.
I don't know. All
right, next, Joshua Schreier. Who also has a brother who's marginally not as mean as him. He is a professor of Jewish studies and Middle Eastern studies in history at Vassar, I believe. Earlier this year, a Palestinian colleague of mine watching a Hamas march filing by near Ramallah muttered to me in a disgusted voice, "They're like our Proud Boys, toxic masculinity, toxic nationalism, toxic everything." But they are sponsoring the arts. Don't forget that.
That's true.
Okay, good, great. A Palestinian is condemning Hamas. Later, a Palestinian student said something like, "I like the Jabha, secular leftist party." Are you familiar with the Jabha?
Well, they're part of they were at one point part of the Palestinian Liberation Front, the Popular Front,
the Popular Front for the PFLP.
Right. Yeah. At one point. Yeah.
Okay. Well, they were, murderous terrorists. They just happened to subscribe to a rudimentary form of communism because they were getting aid from the Soviet Union. Okay, great. So he likes leftist terrorists. Good to know. But Hamas fights back. If you don't like, actually, the PFLP did fight back. They hijacked airplanes. If you don't like violence or Hamas, I think you do need an S after the apostrophe, by the way. At the end of the day, right-wing discourse, take it up with the regime that has given Hamas its cachet and its role. Isn't it cachet, not cash?
I think it's cachet. Yeah.
Is there supposed to be a T at the end of it?
No.
Okay.
There's supposed to be an asterisk over the E. Not an asterisk.
An accent.
Yeah.
Okay, let's not embarrass ourselves syntactically while we're deconstructing this.
Yeah.
All right. So basically, he's saying that Hamas is presumably Israel's fault. Right?
Yeah, that looks like what he's saying. Yes.
Now, Hamas formed in the late 1980s, at the very moment that there was clearly the beginnings of a peace process, right? I mean, it was definitely, there were overtures between the PLO and the Israeli government. They didn't get very far until Rabin was in power, but clearly there was a process that was beginning. So I don't see how Hamas could have been the product of Palestinian suffering if, let's say the Palestinian MLK was about to emerge. As people always said, where's the Palestinian Mandela? Well, maybe they're starting to surface, even though they were former terrorists, but let's not go there for now, and trying to, talk to Israelis. There was actually the beginnings of a peace process. That's when Hamas was born, because Hamas did not want peace with Israel. No Jewish state anywhere in Palestine from the river to the sea, and we will do what is necessary to eliminate this Jewish state, which they amply demonstrated, if not sufficiently during the Second Intifada, then October 7th. Okay, so basically he's blaming Israel for Hamas, which is absurd, and he's also sort of implying that leftist militancy, leftist terrorism is justifiable in certain respects. And we've seen how illiberal the left is in this country, so I'm kind of not surprised about that. All right, thank you, Joshua Schreier. Black Lives Matter Chicago. All right, here we have a bit of a problem. Okay, now let me just be clear that I support Black Lives and I support BLM with small letters, 100% across the board. I've spoke out as much as anyone else in June 2020 against the creeping white supremacy in this country. I'm sure Adam and I have different opinions on much of this in American politics, but there was unquestionably enough of a police brutality problem where African-American men had very good reason to be scared in their daily lives, to the point where I would be scared if that started happening to Jews. But the problem is some of the BLM.
I just want to add that we disagree on these issues, but I too support the principle that Black Lives Matter in small letters.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that Adam is a white supremacist, though, by the fact that we're Zionists, we both are by definition. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but some of the BLM capital letter movements are deeply problematic. I don't know how decentralized their organization actually is, but you remember the Movement for Black Lives had issued a horrible statement in 2000 and I think it was a bit earlier, 2016 or 17. It was soon after Trump came to power. All domestic demands, with one demand number 6, that Israel stops its genocide against the Palestinians and be held accountable immediately. So it accused Israel of genocide in the middle of a domestic agenda. Now, that's the upshot of intersectionalist social justice in the United States, right? I mean, they will take selectively foreign oppressions and insert them into their domestic movement. I don't see how it's in the interest of African Americans to go out into the streets and, you know, shout Palestine will be free from the river to the sea, because they're going to lose supporters who are Jewish that they would otherwise have. I mean, it really makes no sense. But this one, they did repeal, just in defense of Movement for Black Lives, they did repeal that clause and issued a new charter or statement or whatever you want to call it several years later. But here's BLM Chicago. All right, we got a problem here. I stand with Palestine. Okay, who is this person
saying right here is that they stand with Hamas.
Yeah, what are we looking at in the picture for our viewers who don't know the mechanics of October 7th?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, no, I'm asking you. You go for it. You say.
Okay, yeah. So the Hamas got across the fence using this kind of paragliding, right?
Yeah. So basically, it's a direct reference to what Hamas did on October 7th. So this statement, I stand with Palestine in this instance, equals I stand with the decapitation of babies and mothers on sovereign territory that does not belong to the people who had just invaded said territory via parachutes and paragliders. Okay, that's not good. I mean, they're coming out in support of terrorism against Jews, full stop. Okay, and I don't see how it really helps their cause, or rather the Palestinian cause, because with this very picture, they are equating Palestinian liberation with the decapitation of babies and mothers. They are basically saying Palestine equals Hamas with this picture.
They might as well have had an actual picture of you know, a Hamas guy decapitating an Israeli, right? They might as well, right?
Yeah.
This preceded it. This was all part of that whole tactic. So I don't see how this says anything otherwise than I stand with Hamas and what they did on that day.
Yeah, I stand with the brutal murder of the Jews, collectively speaking, as many as possible. Okay. So
now, if they had a picture of innocent Palestinian children, right, you know, then that would be different, right? Then I would say, all right, then this wouldn't even be in our slideshow.
Of course not. No, well, who cares? I mean, it would be an interesting question, is if we're deconstructing intersectionalist social justice, why BLM would choose this of all conflicts to focus on. Why not issue something about Ukraine or Armenia or whatever else? But, you know, they've said the quiet part out loud, quite graphically, and I don't stand with BLM Chicago. I will say that. Yair Wallach, who is a very important scholar in the field of Israeli studies. He is based in Britain. His name's Yair, so presumably Israeli by birth or of Israeli parentage, unless he changed his name like Shaul Magid did. Anything's possible. But he is, I believe, a historian by training, though he seems to do a lot of political sciencey work as well. Now, this is I think this is one of the more remarkable tweets that we have gathered here. The Hamas charter has exactly zero relevance. I doubt if any of their fighters today ever read it. The problem is what Hamas does, not this 40-year-old document that they've been trying to hide.
I don't even know where to start with this.
I know. I mean, the middle, we could skip out sentence number 2, because it's really sentence number 1 and sentence number 3 that are major problems here. Okay, the Hamas charter has exactly zero relevance. That's like saying Mein Kampf had no relevance. Simply because, and we could bring up sentence number 2 here, because, you know, the majority of Germans who voted for Hitler did not vote for him because he was an anti-Semite. They voted for him because he was going to tell France to go fuck itself. He was going to rearm the country. He was going to end poverty and end the Depression, which he did all of those things. They weren't voting him. They're voting for him despite his anti-Semitism, not because of it. Okay, so is that possible with Hamas? We can't read the Palestinian mind. I don't know. But obviously, liberation from Israel was paramount when they were initially voted in, and therefore their charter would have had to have been taken into account at some point. So
also, it doesn't matter if their fighters have read it. The point is that Israel has read it, right? Yeah. And therefore, they know that they cannot deal on any peaceful basis with the Hamas, right? So the fact that the Hamas charter makes it absolutely clear that they want to kill all the Jews and drive, you know, Israel into the sea, and they want Palestine to be free from the river to the sea. The fact that they make that clear is enough to scare the living daylights out of the Israelis
Yeah.
and put them on the defense.
And the whole world is aware of that charter. Now, I've heard some people say, "Oh, but they've issued a new charter, and this really doesn't count."
How different is the new charter?
I haven't read it, but allegedly, at some point, maybe in that charter or not, they claim that they're willing to accept a Palestinian state within the 1967 borders, but they will never recognize Israel's right to exist. So that's as close as they come to a two-state solution. But the bottom line is, if you don't actually repeal the first charter, it still stands. Right? They have not formally repealed that charter. And the bottom line is, it does stand, even if they want to downplay the Jewish conspiracy stuff. Because I heard one of the leaders of Hamas, a spokesperson, interviewed a few days after it happened, maybe the day after it happened, and they were asked by the BBC, "You are murdering women and children, who are living on sovereign Israeli territory. How do you justify that?" He said, "Well, they are settlers, right? They've basically, i.e., they have stolen Palestinian land, so they're legitimate targets in that case." That doesn't sound like a renunciation of their charter, right? It doesn't sound like they're willing to accept a state of Israel, or at least accept the Palestinian state that does not impinge on Israel's internationally recognized borders. Okay, now get to his last.
It's also stupid to say that. I doubt that any of their fighters today have ever read it. Okay, maybe they haven't read it, but do you really think that their fighters have not had anti-Semitism drilled into their heads ever since they were children?
Of course they have.
No, of course, right? So it doesn't matter whether they actually read this document or not.
Yeah.
They've been conditioned to hate Jews.
It really doesn't matter if the average German in the 1930s was reading Mein Kampf. They were well aware of Hitler's views of the Jews. If they were well aware that his policy would be eventually to eliminate every Jew from every inch of territory held by the Reich. He's a little ambiguous on how it's going to happen, unlike Hamas, who clearly states they're going to murder the Jews. So they're much more explicit. But the last sentence here is, the problem is what Hamas does, not this 40-year-old document that they've been trying to hide. Okay, first of all, I don't think
what they do is that they commit brutal atrocities against innocent Israeli civilians. That is what they do.
I would suggest then that what Hamas does is in fact a genocidal problem.
Exactly. So all right, so we're going to put the 40-year document aside and ignore that. All right, we'll do it just as Yair Wallach says, and just look at what they do. It's still horrific.
They blow up Passover seders and decapitate babies. Full stop. And
this is so ludicrous. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't understand how an academic could say something like this. It's beyond me. Oh, Sasha Senderovich. Oh, yeah, professor of Jewish studies and Yiddish literature and Russian literature at the University of Washington. His wife was a student of David Myers. She was involved in that whole kerfuffle with the donors a few years ago. This is a problematic tweet, and there will be others. If true, and this appears to be confirmed, a terrible flashback to Russia bombing humanitarian corridors out of besieged Mariupol in the spring of 2022. So he's retweeting health ministry in Gaza confirms 40 people were killed, 150 injured by an Israeli airstrike that targeted Palestinians attempting to, it was escaping. I remember it. It was a convoy that was leaving northern Gaza to the south, as Israel insisted that Palestinians do. Okay, first off, if anyone doesn't know what Mariupol was, it was an important Ukrainian city in the south, near the Black Sea, that was completely pulverized with Russia, utterly destroyed, as was Melitopol, but Mariupol is a much more important city. Okay, deliberate murder, mass murder of civilians, deliberately killing people who were trying to flee. Evidence later surfaced that they're repopulating these cities with ethnic Russians. They're actually like removing, they're even ethnic Russians who happen to have been living there beforehand, because there are ethnic Russians in southern Ukraine. They're still part, tainted. This is what Stalin did. They're tainted because of, Ukrainian occupation since the collapse of the Soviet Union. That was nothing more than an expansionist, colonialist event that is still in progress to retake lost territory, a war of aggression, where the mass murder of civilians is a deliberate practice, including those in need of humanitarian aid. Now, I remember when this airstrike took place, and I'm going to go with the assumption that it was an accident on Israel's part, right? Israel does not deliberately target civilians in this manner. And it is quite possible that they made a mistake. It's quite possible that there were Hamas fighters nearby, as Hamas, does, because they do want civilians killed so they can make Israel look worse.
Well, there was a command center there.
And what?
There could have been a command center there.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter because Russia's invasion of Ukraine is nothing like Israel's current operation in Gaza, which is entirely a defensive operation, period. Okay, it only happened because of the largest mass killing of Jews that has taken place since the Holocaust. So, this has nothing to do with Mariupol, except maybe it triggers something in his mind. But to make such an analogy it's absurd. King of bad analogies.
What's the point of the sunflower on his next to?
Oh, that's a pro-Ukrainian symbol.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
A lot of people have put that to show their support for Ukraine. Oh, look who's here again. On not flying the Israeli flag on social media and elsewhere, as some American Jews have called on other American Jews to mourn the Israeli dead, while to avenge the brutal killing of Israelis by Hamas last week, at least he admit that happened, the state carrying out that flag pounds all life of Gaza into dust. I don't know what picture he has there, but presumably it's something violent that Israel's doing. But I mean, what he's suggesting here is that if you are holding up an Israeli flag, you're basically siding with oppression, right? It's a flag that stands for mass violence and ethnic cleansing.
These people think the American flag does the same thing.
Oh, he will say that. So there's no question. He still calls George Bush a war criminal on social media. Just for the sake of my audience, I'm going to. Do you see it, Adam?
I see it. Yeah.
Because I have screen sharing on, so I don't know which.
And I've got my Israeli flag, half of my dual loyalty flag here as well.
So this is me saying I stand with Israel, and I'm proud to flag the Israeli flag. Though, unlike Adam, I'm too cheap to buy one at the moment. All right, what do we have next? SRS1, Jamais OK. Okay, just to rehash who this person is, this was a professor who...
Gemma De Cristo is her name.
What's her name?
Gemma De Cristo.
Gemma De Cristo, UC Davis professor, who actually tweeted a threat to Zionists, right? And do I have... yeah, here it says, one group of people we have easy access in the US is all these Zionist journalists who spread propaganda and misinformation. They have houses with addresses, kids in school. They can fear their bosses, but they should fear us more. And then there's a knife and an axe and blood. Okay, first of all, I read this as an endorsement of Hamas's tactics.
Clearly.
It's calling on people to murder, because there's an axe and there is a knife, to murder quote, Zionist journalists, which is a fairly expansive category.
And their children. And their children.
And their children. Yeah, find them at school. Okay, great. So she's putting herself in the camp of those mass shooters. That's what she's basically calling for here. Okay, well, I consider myself a Zionist journalist of sorts. I'm, exposing things that have been in the media here, as we are today. So she is suggesting that my children are a legitimate target. Okay, I would have this person charged with a crime. There is a petition for her to be investigated. I can't believe she has not been fired yet.
There is still an investigation going on at UC.
You know what? I should sign this statement. We all should sign this statement. It's got 3,722 signatures when I last refreshed the browser. 3,729. Okay. Well, this is something I might sign. I rarely would sign something calling for the firing of an academic, but I mean, this person's calling for mass murder of Jews' children. In a country that values freedom of the press. This tweet here, which is rather innocuous given what I just read, in 50 years, we are going to look back on Israel exactly like we look back with shock and horror at the Nazis and wonder, how did we let another Third Reich rise to power, and worse, how did we let them stay in power for 75 years? Well, we have her answer here. She is not going to let it happen because she is going to hunt down, her and her followers are going to hunt down Jews, Zionists, and kill them and their children. So there's her answer. She's going to take down the Third Reich, which is not the United States. I will add again, she is arguing that American Jews are deeply complicit in everything that Israel does. Yes, she's using the word Zionist, but I don't think children are Zionists in that sense.
And she's comparing Israel's actions in response to October 7th as like the Nazis.
Yeah.
Which side has placed babies in ovens?
Yeah. Well, I don't think they've actually done that.
That's what I've heard.
Okay.
So,
As
okay,
far as I know,
maybe that's
incineration.
unsubstantiated, but I've heard rumors to that effect.
The Nazis are the only, well, at least in terms of gas chambers and that form of industrial genocide, the Nazis are the only people in the world who have ever done that. They introduced it, they got a patent on it, and I think nobody's done it. I mean, how can Hamas do it? They don't even have any fuel. You know, it's a.
No, I mean when they've gone into
Oh yeah.
homes in Israel, yeah, and
I don't know about the ovens, but
I've heard rumors to that effect. I'm not
well,
going to.
decapitation. You know, at that point,
That's
we
what's
don't need
happened. Yeah,
anything else. You're saying they put them in ovens alive?
that is what I've heard. That okay, that's a rumor. I don't have evidence in front of me of that, but I've heard it claimed.
Okay. Well, in any case, this person is a mass murderer in the making. Okay, and I have no problem saying that. This person, not tenured assistant professor, should be canned immediately. I don't think you need much more of an investigation. This is utterly absurd. I think this person is a threat to my safety if people actually follow her. And I don't know how many followers she actually has. I'm sure she has some. All right, J. Otto Pohl. This guy is, I am told to understand, is an academic. I don't know if he has a job or not. He studies South Africa. I do know someone who was in his network broadly defined prior. He was actually Facebook friends with him and had to unfriend him because he was so unhinged. People often compare Israel to South Africa under apartheid. But this comparison is very unfair to South Africa. This is taking the whole apartheid thing to a new level. Pretoria never engaged in indiscriminate terror bombing of the Bantustans, nor did it settle fanatical murderers in the Bantustans, nor did it expel hundreds of thousands of people. Now, I'm not an expert on South Africa.
Israel's worse than
yeah.
South. Right.
I'm not an expert on South Africa, but may I suggest that what South Africa was doing was very similar to, you know, the Jim Crow South. So yes, they were killing people. I mean, perhaps there wasn't indiscriminate terror bombings, right? I mean, South Africa, at the very least, their goal, apartheid meant complete separation of the races and keeping the non-white people in an inferior status. They're not going to chase them out of the Bantustans, and they're not going to settle the Bantustans because they don't want the white people living beside them. That's the whole point.
But the Israelis are not engaging in indiscriminate terror bombings either.
I know, I haven't even gotten to that point yet. I'm just trying to say why this whole South Africa thing is even rendered even more absurd. But South Africa is still universally demonized as, you know, the worst, one of the worst states post-Holocaust, right? I mean, post-Holocaust is considered one of the most evil states in the world, certainly by the political left. And, you know, I'm prepared to agree to that to a certain extent. But, you know, and people have been calling Israel an apartheid state all this time, a term that I vehemently object to. Some scholars think that under international law, Israel is an apartheid state. Let's not get into a debate over that now. But the whole point here is that apartheid is not even evil enough, right? It's not enough. It has to be worse. Israel has to be worse than an apartheid state. And that's what he is saying. So this is a completely unhinged person as far as I'm concerned. Israel does not indiscriminately bomb. Any comments further?
No, just that, you know, Israel doesn't indiscriminately bomb.
Yeah, but the upshot is Israel is worse than apartheid. Jay Shalit, he's a professor of English at Ursinus College, or is it Ursinus? I actually had an interview there years ago, Jewish Studies position, back in 2008 or so. Or maybe it was 2010. In any case, God, that second paragraph is so racist. It caught my eye when I saw this. Okay, let's see what the second paragraph is that Biden said that was so racist. Here's paragraph 1. Paragraph 2. I reiterated that Israel has every right to defend its citizens from terrorism and the responsibility to do so in a manner consistent with international humanitarian law, which prioritizes the protection of civilians. So where is
racist there? What's racist?
I don't know. I honestly don't know, unless he's suggesting that calling Hamas terrorists is racist. It's like, oh, those brutal Muslims, they must be terrorists.
Well, they are terrorists.
Yeah, I know. There's no way around it. And there's nothing in there to suggest that every.
Well, actually, you know what? They're actually not terrorists. They're actually the lawful government of Gaza. So they're
state-sponsored terrorists.
Yeah, okay.
State-sponsored terrorism. But it's terrorism, right? I mean, any which way you have it. And moreover, the important thing is here, nowhere is Biden suggesting that every Palestinian is a terrorist, let alone every Muslim, because again, 9/11 analogies pop up in everyone's heads. And I will defend George Bush to this day for going on TV the day after 9/11 and saying, don't take this out on Muslims. Islam is a mighty religion. I don't like his phraseology, but nevertheless, it was a very important speech to make. And Biden's not saying anything different here.
And he also says that it should be done in a manner consistent with international humanitarian law.
Yeah.
Right?
So if humanitarian law is being applied, that implies there are people deserving of humanitarian law in Gaza who are civilians who are not terrorists.
Mm-hmm.
Yet this is indicative, and this is why I want to highlight this, is that the intersectionalist social justice left labels anything they dislike as either racist or fascist, or misogynist or homophobic, or their new favorite one is transphobic, to shut down the conversation. And of course, if you're labeled a racist in this day and age, you're going to be canceled. So I guess he's trying to cancel President Biden. I don't know who he'll be voting for in the next election.
Also, if you go back to the to that first thing, he's using Hashem's name in vain to make this really stupid, ludicrous comment.
Yeah, well, as I explained to my students the other day, God's name is not God, right? His name is Yahweh. Okay, God is just a word to describe deities, which is why you refer to the gods of other cultures. Right. That's why I don't go for this whole G-D thing. I think that's bullshit. So, God has a name. First of all, I have no idea if he's Jewish, but, either way, Jehovah and Yahweh are God's names. They're not God. That's a separate theological debate we don't need to have.
We're not going to get into that today.
And Elohim, lo yeh lecha Elohim acherim. It's in the Bible, right? They're referring to other gods. All right. Simone Zimmerman. Okay, we've discussed her at length because she is the, in quotation mark, brains. That's not an ad hominem attack because I'm talking about the work that she's produced behind that film Israelism, which we discussed in episodes 1 and I believe episodes 3. I highly encourage it. She's one of the founders of If Not Now, a group that in practice is no difference from Jewish Voice for Peace, which is a deeply anti-Semitic group that buys into conspiracy theories straight out of the protocols of the Elders of Zion and believes that harassing and targeting Jews who are gay, because they're easy targets, is a legitimate way to try to liberate Palestine in the United States. So Simone Zimmerman, this was issued either on the 7th or the 8th or the 9th, before Israel responded. Well, they were still trying to get the terrorists out of sovereign Israeli territory. Israel makes every day under apartheid a living hell for Palestinians. Human beings can't live like this. They kept warning us that it would all explode. Blood is on the hands of Israel's fascist government, army, and everyone who has aided their crimes against Palestinians. Okay, that's a pretty weighty sentence that she has there. Okay, first of all, Israel's government is not fascist, much as Trump's government in the United States was not fascist. It's a term that's widely abused, much like the term racist, across the board. Okay, so right there, simply by deploying that word alone, she is impugning Israel. Because once you call someone a racist or a fascist, that's it. They're not people worthy of even having a conversation with. It's a way of shutting down the conversation.
Unless she means that, that it's a right-wing government, which I guess it is. But, Israel's had governments across the political spectrum. They've had left-wing governments, right-wing governments, right? And yet they would still refer to any Israeli government as being fascist.
Yeah. No, If Not Now is very careful with their verbiage, unlike JVP, which considers 1948 a racist endeavor, but they're in practice pretty much the same thing.
Different Israeli governments have over the years tried different approaches in dealing with the problem with the conflict with the Palestinians. There have been peacemakers, right, like Ehud Barak, and there have been hardliners like Benjamin Netanyahu. Right. So the Israelis have tried all different kinds of strategies, but nevertheless, it's not worked. It's not done much to really change the picture of what's actually going on there. But yet, people like Simone Zimmerman continue to refer to Israel as a fascist state.
Yeah, let me be clear. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is an ethno-national conflict that at one point included the wider Arab world. It's two peoples claiming the ancestral right to the same land. Israel has done some bad things. The Palestinians have done some bad things. Palestinians are doing terrible things at the moment. And, by suggesting that this is some form of fascist occupation and nothing more is a complete misreading of the entire picture. Deliberately, willfully misreading. She's not an academic, she's an activist, so I wouldn't expect better of her, right?
Right. And by the way, we're actually considering as a leading candidate for the Schmagegi of the Year, Simone Zimmerman.
She's a good Schmagegi. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we will keep that in mind, and this tweet will be crucial. Yeah, your wallet. Oh, look who we have again. Okay. Locking up 2 million people in an open-air prison for 15 years is a horrendous thing, and it engenders horrendous things. It is not surprising that people with nothing to lose will sometimes do terrible things. Okay. He issued this on October, either the 7th or the 8th. It was issued pretty quickly while things were going on. And it's you know, I mean, maybe he's trying to smooth out a little bit of the tweet he's retweeting. Israel has been committing unspeakable war crimes, crimes against humanity, and illegal collective punishment, yada, yada, yada. Any comment or analysis that doesn't take this fact into consideration today is hollow, immoral, and dehumanized. On October 7th, to say something like that. So he's not disagreeing with this, except he's calling what Hamas did something terrible. Okay. That's the extent of it. In Wallach's defense, he has tweeted since then things, you know, condemning Hamas, but he wasn't willing to really do that. This is the justification, either the justification or the explanation that Sukharov had.
Yeah, which is it? Which is the one that we're supposed to focus on? The justification or the explanation?
I guess it's an explanation.
Okay, all right.
Well, justification, I guess, would be in Hamas's charter, which Wallach said doesn't count. I don't. Okay. Well, oh, here we go again. Look at this. This is better. This is a call for expulsion genocide. Silence in the face of this threat amounts to green light. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu called on Palestinians living in Gaza to leave now because the Israeli military is going to turn all Hamas hiding places into rubble.
Well, first in the earlier tweet, he's mad that they're locked up.
Yeah.
And in this tweet, he's mad that Israel wants to let them out.
Right? Well, they're not letting them out. They're telling them to go to the southern part of
course. Right. But,
yeah.
You know what I mean.
No, and to be clear here, this isn't ethnic cleansing. This isn't a call for expulsion and genocide.
It's a temporary removal so that they can, clean Hamas's clocks and then let the refugees back in.
We're giving you advice to leave, even if it might, be inhumane to the people in question. But this is a product of the war that's going on. They're actually telling the people to leave, not stick around while we bomb the hell out of them. Right? That is important. Sheldon Rance. He's not an academic of any sort, but he, for some reason, is friends with the whole Sukharov Magid crowd, and he's always on Facebook. He prompted me. He actually literally said once to me on Facebook, probably about 3-4 years ago, look, I don't like Hamas, but I wrote a whole op-ed about it. Look, I don't like Hamas, but it's really worth reading. I think it's funny. So indiscriminately shooting rockets at civilians, Hamas targets the military as well, as October 7th clearly showed.
Well, that's true.
Well, then what about the women and children?
Well, they did target the military too. They targeted military and civilians.
But unlike Hamas, the IDF doesn't insert itself into civilian populations.
Right. So it's utterly ludicrous.
Yeah, I mean, so fine. Wow, okay, they went after military targets. Maybe there are some intelligent people, militarily speaking, in Hamas's government. You would think after being cultivated for so many decades, they would have some military intelligence at hand. Maybe they don't. Or maybe
they have like half of the hostages are IDF soldiers.
Yeah, no, I mean, this was a well planned out military operation of sorts, which included butchering as many women and children as they can get their hands on. Okay, Sheldon, you're not, what kind of name is Sheldon for a terrorist supporter, right? Launch that rocket, Sheldon, launch that rocket. To quote When Harry Met Sally, Sheldon is a name that you give to your accountant, right? Someone who does your taxes, not someone who launches a rocket, or as the movie goes, not someone you're going to have good sex with, as Meg Ryan claims she did with a man named Sheldon, a Jewish man named Sheldon, I should add. All right, let's move on. Oh, look who it is.
Again with Sasha. Yeah.
The tower visible. Okay, let's back up for a second on this. Israel, October 20th, I think it was, whatever date was Shabbat, decided, as a grand gesture here, because it cares for Israeli civilians who are currently held captive in Gaza, set up a long, empty Shabbat table with empty chairs to honor the civilians and IDF soldiers taken prisoner and held hostage by Hamas. It's a very profound statement to do something like this, as anyone who studies collective memory. And, if you want to be pernicious about it, you could say propaganda too. But, given that it's representing the truth and something that is 100% ethical on Israel's part, I'm not going to use the word propaganda here.
And
Sasha,
it goes to the idea that you leave a place setting for Elijah at a Passover Seder, like they're leaving a place setting for all of the hostages when they return.
Was Elijah kidnapped by Hamas?
No, but you know what I mean.
But they would if they could.
They would if they could, yeah. That's the origin of this.
Yeah, though I imagine he is a prophet in Islam too, I suspect.
Yeah.
Anyways, Sasha, who appears to be good at using Google Maps, but not at drawing circles and arrows, points out that the tower visible in the museum photo, this is near a museum in Tel Aviv, is part of the larger Hakiria complex, which is the IDF headquarters. Not detailed on Google Maps because I assume it's a sensitive military site. So a black site. So why is he bothering to do this? Why is he bothering to juxtapose this black site of the IDF with this table? Yeah. The Marganit Tower, that's part of the complex at Hakiria, the IDF headquarters, in the shadow of which the museum campus sits. Carpet bombing Gaza directed from those headquarters, which resulted in a huge death toll of, among others, hundreds of Palestinian children. So
I doubt that there's any intentional symbolism involved here. But if there is, all right, if there's anything symbolic that we can discern from this, it's not what he's saying. It's that the IDF is going to be the ones to rescue these hostages.
That's a great point. I hadn't thought of that as a possibility, and I really don't think that's what's happening either. I think it's just purely incidental.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, but he's suggesting, he's either suggesting that, okay, it's a coincidence, but look here, we're unmasking the true evil of Israel by showing, this great friendly state. It's like saying, look, we made the desert bloom, but we removed several 100,000 people. He's saying, look, the shadow it's casting its shadow over the Shabbat table, right? It's a very Soviet reading of things in many respects. And obviously it's reading too much into the situation because it's not deliberate. He's sort of implying that it might be deliberate, but he's not saying that outright. In any case, it's truly reprehensible because this is a very nice gesture on Israel's part to 200 civilians being taken hostage, some of whom have already been killed by Hamas.
Why is he even bothering talking about how it's not on Google Maps? Like, that's
because it's a black site. He probably watched too many of those black site movies.
Why is he even throwing that in there? Like, so what?
Because he's into black site military headquarters. His tweets about Iraq were constantly, underscoring the pernicious, deep states and their hidden black ops and black military sites.
But this is right in downtown Tel Aviv.
Yep, it really is. Sasha again. Okay. The role of Netanyahu and his government in having hundreds of Israeli civilians massacred in Saturday's Hamas attack is enormous. How enormous is becoming clearer. A war criminal not only against Palestinian civilians under occupation and blockade, but also against his fellow citizens. Now, I don't have a time date stamp here, but presumably it's pretty soon afterwards because he says this Saturday, so less than a week would have had to have passed. And he's attacking the Israeli government he's attacking Netanyahu as a war criminal. Now, I'm not saying everyone should just, I don't like Netanyahu, and I would have been happy to see him go from office. But as a Jew who supports Israel, this is wartime, and I'm not going to say, hey, let's have a change of government. I'm certainly not going to start, saying this man's, and I certainly won't start doing this, calling him a war criminal, killing Palestinian civilians days after 1,400 Jews were slaughtered. And Israel had yet to even begin a counter operation.
What is he talking about against his fellow citizens? Like, what's he implying there? A war criminal against his fellow citizens. I'm
sure it's the very brief detention of some lefties at the judicial protests that took place a few months ago. Okay, and I can assure you that nobody has disappeared. Right? He's under the impression that this is Russia, the Soviet Union, where he was born. Okay, an utterly absurd tweet in every respect. Oh, that's the last one.
That's it?
Yeah, we get to finish with Sasha. Okay. Well, as a closing moment for our podcast, I would like to highlight a statement issued by Jewish Studies just the other day. We have it right here. It thus far hasn't had too many big names because maybe they realize that even this is beyond the pale. Let me refresh it in case any more signatures have come in. No, same as before. Now, this is easily the worst statement I've ever read issued by Jewish Studies, ever. We, the Understein faculty, as well as alumni, undergraduate and graduate students in Jewish Studies and Jewish students who Jewish Studies represent, are writing to demand that Jewish Studies centers, institutes, association departments publicly call for 1, an immediate ceasefire. They've already done that in a previous statement. 2, Israel to restore water and electricity to Gaza immediately. 3, to allow humanitarian aid to enter Gaza immediately. And 4, the end of all U.S. funding to Israel immediately. The only moral position at this time is to stop genocide, underlined in blue. Oh, I believe, is it hyperlinked? It's not even hyperlinked. Oh, no, it is hyperlinked. Okay. Oh, and they're hyperlinking to Jewish currents. Great news source it shows there. And ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. And again, the ethnic cleansing is superfluous because once you've conducted genocide, ethnic cleansing is, it's a lesser thing. By the Israeli government with full material support from the US and many European countries, collective punishment is not humane or just, blah, 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 blah. We don't have to read all this. What's interesting is the closing part here. Jewish studies institutions must demonstrate that de-escalation is the only ethical path forward. Many of us have spent our academic careers fearful of the consequences we may face for criticizing the Israeli state and Zionism. Now, my take on this at the moment is it's really the other direction. If you're in Jewish studies and you support Zionism, you are the one who's going to have a problem, not the ones who are criticizing Zionism, because in May 2021, 260 people, including untenured ones, signed a statement condemning Israel as a racial supremacist state. The bloodshed over the last 22 days, all entirely preventable, is a direct consequence of our silence. So they're claiming they haven't spoken out before. We must change. We must do better. Never again must mean never again for everyone. So this reads like, as someone who has studied Stalinism and the Inquisition, this very much reads like an auto-da-fé, the purging of one's soul. Your guilt can never be fully exculpated, right? Every last ounce, if you have been a heretic, as they claim they have, by not sufficiently speaking out, you need to repent, repent, and repent over and over again. And both under Stalin and in the Inquisition, you were killed anyway, but your soul was saved, under the Inquisition, of course. That's what it reads like to me. But the whole thing is absurd, right? There's no mention of Hamas, period. They're not even mentioned once, okay? It's just about Israeli genocide and Jewish studies culpability in Israeli genocide. So they basically want Jewish studies to sever all ties with Israel once and for all. Now, I would like to point out that the big names in Jewish studies have not signed this yet, the usual culprits. There have been a few. Mark Levine is a whack job who I constantly, who's constantly on the media and whatnot. He's like a militant anti-Zionist, pro-Palestinian, dare I say, Hamas supporter, based on previous statements he's made, or Hamas apologist rather. So he's not, there's no surprise there. Barry Trachtenberg is in Jewish studies, a Jewish historian, has a very good job, and who's written some notable books, but he's very far left in Jewish studies. He's even testified before some sort of hearing at Congress, calling on the government to not pass a resolution against anti-Semitism because it would have a, quote, chilling effect on Palestinians. But so the other big names haven't signed this yet. Did Elliot Ratzman signed it? Okay, Elliot Ratzman signed it. He's one of these big ethicists in Jewish studies. And I've heard of the last person, Natalia Omer. There are people here who are, relatively, well-known academics. The other striking thing, look at the school where all the first signatories come from.
Yeah, a lot of UCLA.
My God, all of the first, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Suggest that this was
12,
written by someone at UCLA.
13, 14. Yeah, 14. The 14 first signatures are UCLA. Many of them, some of them graduate students, including an undergrad. Imagine putting your signature on this as an undergrad. It shows you that, where the chilling effect lies in this country, and it's not against the anti-Zionists. But the fact that it was, so many UCLA people signed it, I suspect that this was UCLA authored and distributed through their Jewish studies program. So just to return, full circle and go back to our previous podcast with Judea Pearl, which I highly encourage that you watch if you haven't watched it yet. He was highlighting the problem of Jewish studies at UCLA. where the professors talk out of both sides of their mouths, as he put it, right? They claim to be moderates, but they clearly have played a role, if not in authoring, then in disseminating very quickly this document. What's striking is, yeah, the professors haven't signed it, from their Jewish studies program.
Yeah, almost all of them are students.
Unbelievable,
There's some that aren't, but yeah.
Yeah.
Which shows that they're not concerned that signing this is going to hurt their chances of getting a job.
And they're speaking on behalf of Jewish studies. What gives these people the right to claim to represent Jewish studies? I'm in Jewish studies, and I say right now, you do not represent me, period. You do not speak on my behalf. And I haven't been silent. I've been speaking out against people who issue garbage like this, and I will continue to do so. So this is a really terrible document. And I wonder how many will sign it in the end, how many of the big names in Jewish studies. I mean, I think maybe for some, I'd like to think that this is too far. We will revisit this on a future episode if, in fact, the bigger names do, in fact, sign this document. So I'm kind of hopeful that this might be a little bit too far, that even Jewish studies faculty have a threshold. Chanda Prescott Weinstein is a very well-known physicist who does all sorts of gender theory in physics, and claims, well, I think she's part Jewish, but also claims to be in Jewish studies. Sorry?
Gender theory in physics?
Yeah, I mean, she is a physicist, so much of what she said is above my head, but her tweets relating to...
depending upon your gender, like, isn't physics universal?
Well, I've seen tweets from various leftist outfits that have argued that mathematics and Western science is a tool of Western imperialism. So not necessarily. No, science is not objective, according to the intersectionalist left. It's a tool of colonialism. Leaving aside that, the most important innovations in science before Newton did come from the Arab world and the Indian subcontinent, but we won't go there for the moment. I think that pretty much covers it. I'm going to turn screen share off so people will have the pleasure of seeing us again in full screen. And I think this was just about an hour long. And I think this was a damn good episode.
Yeah.
There is shit getting spewed out on Twitter by academics, and Jewish ones at that, very often, that really should not be getting spewed out. It's harmful. And students are seeing it. I don't know what these people are saying in their classrooms. I don't know. So I can't make any claims about that. But it's not as if students, it's not as if community members don't see this on social media. It's not as if they don't believe that academics are the guiding light that should lead the way. I mean, Republicans don't think that, but there are a lot of people in the middle who still actually cling to that belief that we are some sort of great ethical group of people who know better because we've read more and have studied more. I have a PhD. I'm not going to sit here and claim, and I'm a tenured professor, and I'm not going to sit here and claim that I am better than everyone else, especially if I'm talking about shit in disciplines that I know nothing about, right? So this is all a big problem. And we've also discussed a few of the activists. So this has infected left-wing circles, including some that are well beyond the pale of anything that has anything to do with Jews and Palestinians.
Everything they're saying is completely irrational, and any ethical framework at all needs to be rational. And I'm not sure where they're getting their ethical framework from if they're being this illogical.
Well, their framework isn't ethical, right? They have an ideology, much as the USSR had an ideology. And certainly what the ideology espoused, again, if you remove all facts, if you take all facticity out, I'd like to use that word sometimes, and you just look at the ideology and assume that reality is the implementation of that ideology, then the whole thing is sound. Israel's committing genocide, and we need to speak out against this evil fascist regime, whether we are African-American Black Lives Matter people, or whether we are professors of English who don't actually work on the region. We have an ethical obligation because this is what social justice demands. But the people in Jewish studies who are saying this, I mean, this is, they know better. They do know better. And if they don't know better, well, even if they do, either way, they really should not be teaching Jewish studies. It's a major problem. And I don't think anyone who signed that last statement we read has any business teaching in a Jewish studies program. It's insane. They want to basically decouple Zionism from Jewish studies. And there have been, which is what the Critical Zionist Network is trying to do as well, right? Except they're not Jewish. So we have Jews actually trying to do that. Zionism was an aberration in the Jewish world, and we need to remove it from the identity of our centers. Which again, if you're a historian, even if you want to say Zionist was an aberration, you don't make it disappear, right? It's part of your history. Right? It doesn't just vanish. The Karaites are still part of Jewish studies, even though they were declared to be non-Jews by Saadia Gaon in the 9th century for rejecting the Talmud and rabbinic control over the Jewish world. I just taught them the other day. So yeah, any closing remarks?
No, just if anyone out there sees a tweet that they find really ludicrous and want us to talk about on our podcast, please send that to us.
Assuming it's an actual academic, we don't need some random whack job.
Right, of course.
And we had a couple of those in there, but I mean, in general, we want people who are in the academy, people who do have a standing of some sorts, at least in name, to show that they are really not thinking very clearly and they are poisoning the public's mind with what they have to say. We might have a tweet of the week thing at some point where we'll just, collect the worst tweet of the week and discuss it in order to finish up our episodes.
It would be good. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we're done. This was a fun episode. This is Jared Tanney signing off.
Yeah, and this is Adam Fuller signing off.
Our next podcast will probably be one with Dr. Norman Goda of Florida, and it should be a terrific episode. Thank you for tuning in.